what makes someone remarkable? Do you mind being described as the white people whisperer? What is the optimal age to get married?
That year was the first year that we ever heard a teacher talk about race.
Is the college application process fair?
You start to find the non-obvious way kind of works.
Is there like a cartoonist community? So many times when we go live with these things, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom.
Boom.
Happy Thursday, Non-Obvious Nation. We are here for a very special edition of the Non-Obvious Insight Show. And as you might notice, I'm a little more dressed up than usual. In fact, this is the first time that I wore a jacket in the last, I don't know how long, maybe 7, 8 months, something like that. But it feels nice to get dressed up, I have to say. And it is a good occasion to do it because today we are announcing the winners of our annual Non-Obvious Book Awards, the Shortlist and the best nonfiction books of the year. So I'm so excited to share this with you. And actually, beyond the announcement of the best books, we're actually going to do a few other things to talk about books. So the entire show today is going to be dedicated to nonfiction books, business books, and just the most fascinating reads of the year. And before we get started, I have to just issue a big thanks to every single author who went out and gave us a chance to look at their books. And what was so fascinating about so many of these books is that we had a chance to read them and dig into them, and we had so many submissions, and it is heartbreaking, I have to say, as an author, just heartbreaking to not be able to give awards to everybody. I mean, I wish we could do that. That would be so awesome, because I know how much heart and soul goes into every one of these books. And there's so many of my friends that had submitted books and been part of this whole submission process. And so, first of all, I just want to say a big, deep respect and gratitude and thank you to all of the authors who submitted their books this year. The book awards are for the books published in 2020. And so we look at this every year, and we spend really the whole year gathering books and reading books across our entire Non-Obvious team. And we look at them on multiple metrics. And if you're familiar with any book awards, you know that most of them sort of do a couple of things that we don't do. So the first thing that they typically do is it's a paid submission. So you pay to submit your book, and we don't accept any payments or any bribes or anything like that. We look at books entirely on their merit. We don't consider sort of where they are published from, whether it's a big publisher or a small publisher or independently published. We look at all books. We give them all a shot. We do look at books in print. So we don't evaluate just ebooks. And part of the reason for that is because we look at the whole package. I mean, we're looking at not only the books, but we're also looking at how do we consider the whole way that the book is packaged. So the cover, the printing, everything about it. So we're really looking at the whole experience. The other thing is that we don't put books into categories, because a lot of times you'll see like this is a sales book, or this is a marketing book, or this is a leadership book. And the challenge is like, if it's a sales leadership book, like where do you put it? So like we don't categorize books in that way. We just look at like the best reads, and then we've got 5 categories, which I'll share later, for the most interesting and fascinating best books of the year. And so that's how we do it. And the program for today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the long list, which we already announced about 2 weeks ago. So we had a number of books that made our long list finalists, all amazing books. Definitely check them out at nonobviousbookawards.com. They're already listed there. We'll talk about some trends, some overarching trends from all of the books this year, the shortlist finalists, and all of the best book titles, best book covers, and then the 5 award winners. So don't you hate it when there's award programs and they waste so much time before they get to the awards? Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to roll right into it. And the first thing that I'll share is the long list. So this is an image here of the entire long list that you're going to look at. And definitely check out these books. They're all at Non-Obvious Book Awards, and I won't get to mention all of them on the show today, but they are all definitely worth a read. I highly recommend them. One of the things that I'm known for every year is that I go and curate trends for my annual trend book. And what I thought would be interesting was just to look at some of the overarching trends in the submissions that we got. And so I want to take you through 10 kind of macro trends that we saw when it came to books. And the first one is inequality. And there were all of these books talking about inequality of financial systems, inequality in politics, inequality in housing. And these are just some of the books that are featuring this theme across them. And I thought it would be interesting to share some of these big macro themes. And a bit later on today, we'll be publishing an article that includes all of these themes and recaps all the books and links to all the books. So just in case you can't see them, you'll be able to watch the recap of all of them. The second big trend is what I guess I'd call rage politics, which is probably no surprise that 2020 was like a deeply political year here in the US. We had a big election, and there were tons and tons of Trump books related to politics. In fact, so many that I couldn't even show my usual image of them stacked up on our table because there were just so many that I actually pulled this image from the New York Times, and there's an article about all of these books there. So that was the second big theme, the second big trend. The third one was all about mentoring women and just helping more women to be successful. And there were so many different takes on this. Some organizational, what does it take to create an organization that is more friendly towards women? There was a great book called Good Guys, all about how men can support women. Lots and lots of fascinating books in this category. So definitely a theme that we saw across the year. Another theme was just the origin of fascinating things. So there was a book about the origin of coffee. There was a book about how to breathe better. One about becoming clean and maybe not taking a shower as frequently as we do. A book all about who gets into college and why, from Jeff Solingo, who I had on the show a couple weeks ago. Book about eels, just the nature of eels and how we just don't know how they operate. Really, really interesting books all about these origins of these things that you may not have considered, but now you can take a deep dive into it with books. And one of the things I love about books is just they give you a chance to like see what the truth is behind some of these things that we just think about, but we don't necessarily consider or take deep dives into. So that was really interesting as well. Another big trend was inclusion, diversity and inclusion. We saw this in so many different books. And actually, this is one very close to my heart right now, because we're working on something very ambitious, which is related to this. And many of these authors of these books that you see here will actually be over speaking at a big summit that we're putting on in January called the Beyond Diversity Summit. And so if this topic is interesting for you, I definitely recommend checking out this event. It's entirely free to register, just nonobvious.com/diversity, and you'll be able to go there. And one of the most exciting things is that we're producing a book relating to the book awards out of the event, and that's called Beyond Diversity, and it'll take some of the most interesting insights from everybody and put them into a book format. So definitely recommend you check that out if you want to dig deeper into that topic. And let's keep rolling with some of the trends. Another one was just be you, just be yourself. And that's okay. And there was some really interesting takes on this. I mean, there was a member of the Secret Service talking about sort of being in the Secret Service and what that taught her about having confidence. There was another one about just being happy in your body, even if you happen to be fat. There was a couple of books about that. Big problems, what we don't talk about when we talk about fat girls in black bodies. I mean, this theme was across multiple books. There's another one called Average is Awesome. And that was just about like, look, you don't have to be the best. Like, it's okay to be average. And I just thought these were interesting takes on just like be yourself, have confidence in being yourself and get past the anxiety sometimes that we put on ourselves. And that was a big theme that I think fit perfectly into 2020. Another big trend was just the future. I mean, 2020 is a decade year. I wrote a book about trends that came out this year as well. And a theme in many of them was just about the relationship of humans versus technology. And one of the threads of hope that we saw kind of over and over throughout these books was the idea that we can have a more human future and the humans will be okay. And many of these talked about the future of work, what the future of leadership is going to be, and how we will survive. It will be okay. And we can project forward into the future how we will be okay. So that was an interesting trend as well. Kindness. was a great one for 2020 and really important because you saw many books talking about how the world is a little bit better now than we sometimes hear it is when we read all of these media and all of these things. It is us together, we'll be together, we'll help each other. All of those things were themes for kindness. Ninth trend was what we called broken truth. And broken truth was kind of about how we just don't know what to believe. There's so many instances of fake news. There's so many instances of just like unbelievable stuff. And so we're confused. We don't exactly know what to think. And these books sort of called that out and talked about it in a fascinating way. And the last category was like making decisions, making change, like choosing a different path, being innovative, being reinvented. And all of these books sort of talked about that theme as well. So those were some of the big themes. The other thing I wanted to share with you was a couple of the most interesting book titles. So I love book titles. I spend a lot of time thinking about book titles and even coming up with them when I work with authors. And there were a couple of books that I thought just had brilliant book titles, which is in itself an art form. So I want to share some of those with you. And the first one was Bow Down, and it was a book all about what we can learn from dominatrixes. I think that's the plural, which was a great topic and really, really interesting. Another one, Feck Perfection, just a nice play on words. The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova, great author. Higher Purpose, I just love the dual meaning of that because you're purpose hiring and then you're just going for a higher purpose. And then this astrophysics book, The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking, just great book titles. Love these titles. Another thing that I wanted to spotlight was amazing book cover designs. I pay a lot of attention, as we all do, to cover designs. And there were a couple that just really stood out this year as just amazing. So I want to share some of those with you as well. Ingredients, the strange chemistry of what we put in us and on us with this kind of weird looking Cheeto in the middle. I think it's a Cheeto. Great cover. The Black Friend, Frederick Joseph. This is just such an amazing book cover. Beautiful colors, just really, really nicely done. The Book of Eels. This was just printed beautifully and nicely designed. Can't Even, about millennial burnout, was just like such a great use of space. And then I love this cover from The Sum of the People, which is a book all about the census. And that was great as well. So those were some of the overall things that I wanted to share. But without further ado, we are now at the point where we are going to share the shortlist. So let's talk about the best 15 books of the year as rated by our team. And the first shortlist winner is Together, Vivek Murthy, who was former Surgeon General and now is back once again. And I saw him speak at a event, and his book had a fascinating perspective on loneliness. And for each one of these, I wanted to share kind of a non-obvious insight from the book. And then from this book, loneliness ran like a dark thread through many of the more obvious issues that people brought to my attention. The more I studied the seesaw relationship between loneliness and togetherness, the more convinced I became of the great power of human connection. So an amazing book about just what does it take to fight loneliness and how sometimes loneliness is sort of the core issue behind lots of other things, whether it is addiction or sometimes suicide or any of these things that kind of can be traced back to this one thing. And if we could solve loneliness as a public health issue, which is really what his book talks about, the world would be better off. So first winner, Togetherness, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Second book I want to share, a shortlist winner, is Ghosting the News. And Ghosting the News was a fantastic book by Margaret Sullivan, all about the spiraling death right now of local news and what a big problem that is in the world, because it allows for the spread of misinformation, and local sources, real journalists, are slipping away. And that's a major cost to our society overall and to just the world overall. And so that is, that was a really, really interesting perspective and just a great book. So highly recommend that. That was our second shortlist winner, Ghosting the News. Third shortlist winner I want to bring to your attention is Bring Yourself, which is a fantastic book about negotiation and the power to negotiate from your perspective. And a wonderful quote from this book was, "I'm no intention of boycotting the word fair, but in Courage, using it wisely by asking a question. What does fair mean to you? Words matter in a negotiation. Sorry for the typo there. You have to be discerning and methodical. The word fair is neither. This was just a great perspective on what it takes to be effective at negotiation, and how sometimes we don't take the right perspective or the other person's perspective, or focus on our strengths, and we just dismiss ourselves as not being great at this skill of negotiation. And it's from a professor who just taught this topic for many, many years, and I thought it was a wonderful take on that topic. The next shortlist winner I actually mentioned before, but not as a shortlist winner, which is The Sum of the People, a book all about the census and the power of the census, which is timely for this year because in the US we have a census collection either going on right now, or I think it might have just finished. I'm not exactly sure what the deadline was. But one of the perspectives from this book that I thought was wonderful is scholars have often cast the census as an instrument of power, but the census can be a tool too of the powerless. It has been embraced, appropriated, and even subverted by those being counted, and it's served as a medium for individual and minority self-expression. So there's a different take on the census from this book of how it's been used throughout time, throughout history, and it really kind of goes backward in history and forwards. And so if you like a book that offers that sort of perspective over a longer period of time of history of something that seems like it's just happening right now, this was a great book. Highly recommend it. Another shortlist winner is a book called The Hot Hand, which is written by a sports journalist who essentially talks about like streaks and whether they're a real thing. Like, can you really be hot? Can you be on fire? And what he writes about is lots of athletes, as you would expect, because he's a sports journalist. And he says when athletes like Steph Curry get hot, they take a puff of the powerful legal performance-enhancing drug, otherwise known as confidence. The unscientific name for that automatic unconscious feeling is the zone. And this whole book is about whether that can be achieved on purpose or whether it's something that just happens, and really digs into the science behind it. So if you like behavioral science, if you enjoy a combination of sports and science, this is going to be a great book for you to read. I highly recommend that as well. Next shortlist winner is a expansive book about a topic that most of us don't think about very often. It's called The Fabric of Civilization, and it's really a story about the history of textile. And this book, one of my favorite quotes from there is actually a kind of a dual quote. What we usually call the Stone Age could just as easily be called the String Age. I was repeatedly struck by what a fundamental technology textiles represent, what world-shaking consequences they've had, and how remarkable much of their history is. And what was fascinating about this book was just how ignored textiles have been to some degree, because for the majority of history, when textiles were being produced, they were produced by women, not men. And so the Stone Age kind of describes the tools, whereas the String Age might be the string that was used to bind the tools together. And it was just a different take on history that I thought was highly original, very readable, great imagery within the book, very, very fascinating read, really, really valuable. Definitely recommend. The next shortlist winner is How Design Makes the World by Scott Burkham, who talks a little bit about how things are designed and the challenge that comes from the way that things are designed. And what he says is we often fall into the trap of calling something intuitive, even if it makes sense to us, and call it hard to use if it doesn't. It's no wonder so many things in life seem perfectly made for the people who made them and few others. And there's so many examples throughout history of just poor design causing really, really serious problems, whether it's not being able to find the fire escape in a building, or he talks about the fire in the Notre Dame Cathedral and the role that design played in making that as bad as it was. Just really, really great stories in this book, and a wonderful perspective on the importance of design and getting design right. Far beyond graphic design, it's also just designing things and designing solutions. So definitely worth a read. Another book that we had on our shortlist is The Divergent Mind, which focuses on something that I think a lot of people don't focus on when it comes to even these conversations about diversity and inclusion, which is temperament rights. So what the author writes is, I created the phrase temperament rights to capture this idea of one's temperament or neurological makeup being respected in the same way that we respect other core aspects of people, such as gender, sexuality, or ethnic identity. And it was a different read on a topic that I think is across. I mean, it was one of our trends, inclusion and diversity. It was like a big topic in lots of books. And this particular book I found just a fascinating and different take on that topic. And that's one of the things we often look for. It's like, is it a different take on a topic that you're seeing lots of conversation about, lots of people writing about? The next choice for the shortlist was a fun read. It was called Just Don't Be an Asshole. And it was written by the mom of boys. And I appreciated this as a dad of boys. But also it was just an interesting and engaging read because there was lots of interesting advice here. So here's one sample quote from the book. If you view your teacher or professor as someone who works for you, you are an asshole. A better way to view your teacher is as the person who can fail you for being an asshole. The best way to look at your teacher is as your practice boss. And the book was really filled with that type of insight. It was clearly written for the 20-something-year-old male, and definitely a great gift book to give to anybody in your life who happens to be that age, but just an entertaining read otherwise as well. So definitely recommend that. Next book on the list is Upstream by Dan Heath. And this is, I believe, the first book that he has written without his brother. But it's a really, really great perspective on solving problems upstream. So the idea here is so often in life we get stuck in a cycle of responses. We put out fires, we deal with emergencies, we handle one problem after another, but we never get around to fixing the systems that caused the problems. And this book is all about moving what he calls upstream and how to do that. And there's lots and lots of great stories, and like an eye-opening story about Hurricane Katrina and how maybe that wasn't as bad as it could have been because of a simulation that happened about a year before that. So really unusual perspectives on this idea of solving problems before they happen, which is such an important topic and highly useful for most of us. So those are 10 shortlist winners, and now we are up to the winners of the Non-Obvious Book Awards for 2020. And I'm very excited to share each one of them with you, and they're each in a different category. And as we shared all of these and as we talked about them, we just had lots and lots of commentary from Twitter. We had authors sort of responding back and forth. And I just want to say thank you once again to all of the authors who were selected on our long list, all of the authors who took the time to submit their books to us and send them. We just deeply respect all of you. And we're just so bummed that we couldn't give an award to everybody. I mean, there's just so many great books. And so these books that we share with you are certainly not the only ones that you should be reading. They were just the ones that stood out to us as being the most non-obvious, fascinating, and the award winners. So once again, thank you to all of the authors who chose to share books with us, to submit books to us. We really, really appreciate you. And now we want to get to the winners of the Non-Obvious Book Awards. And the first winner is for the most important book of the year. And this was Make Change by Sean King. And this book was just a riveting read. I mean, one of the things that anybody who kind of knows us and knows me knows is that whenever I'm reading a book, I'm always using these kind of tabs across the book. And everybody else on our team is sort of reading them the same way. And if you can kind of see that, there's lots and lots of spotlighted things in this particular book. And every one of the books that we're looking at, we're always saving interesting ideas. And this was such a wonderful read because it not only talked about the need for change, but the author, Sean King, gives a practical way of actually making that happen based on his experience as a community organizer, based on just lots and lots of work that he's done and positive results that he's had or been involved in. So it was powerful for that reason. It was powerful because of some of the descriptions of the racism and violence that he had to really overcome to get to the point that he's at now. And so it's a wonderful story, well written, and highly actionable as well, and our choice for the most important book of the year, Make Change. Let's see. The next winner I want to share with you is Lurking. Lurking is kind of a strange title for a book, but it was a very fascinating book about the history of the internet. And there were so many different ways of describing the phase of the internet that we were in. That was sort of like reading a history of myself in a funny way, because the author, Joanne McNeill, she talks about the rise of Friendster, and then how blogs took that over, and then how it moved to MySpace, and then it went into Facebook, and then Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest, and just the way that these different phases of our internet lives were categorized was such an interesting way to write a book, a way to structure a book. And the quote from here that I thought was really fascinating is, "The internet needs its librarians. Until then, the internet remains imperfect, a hell that is fun, ruled by idiots and thieves, providing users with slingshots for self-expression, but no shield from the bile that rebounds." And this was just an example of the type of writing that you get in this book. It's very poetic. I think her background is really a fascinating one. In fact, it was in her bio. She is an instructor at the School for Poetic Computation. So that's what you get. Great writing, really interesting topic, fascinating take on the history of the internet, and just really, really a valuable read. So highly recommended, Lurking by Joanne McNeill. The next winner of the most useful book of the year is True or False by Cindy Otis. And this book is all about how to read the news, basically how to be a consumer of the news. But the way that it's written and put together is meant for young adults. In fact, I think it might even be classified as a young adult book. And this was one of those. It's funny, I gave this book, as I do with many books that I read that I think my boys might be interested in. I gave this to my 16-year-old to read. And at the end of the year, I kind of looked at the books that I gave him. And what he said to me was, "This was probably the only book you gave me that I actually really read, like all the way through." And I thought that was a great testament to this book, its usefulness, how it engages its target audience, which I believe is meant to be kind of younger people, but it's useful for all of us because the stories are fantastic, the layout is wonderful, highly visual, and it talks about what may be one of the most important topics that we don't spend enough time teaching our kids, which is how to navigate the news, like how to understand what's real, what's true, and what isn't. So definitely a worthwhile read. The winner for the most useful book of the year is Cindy Otis, True or False. The next book I want to share with you is The Lost Family, which is the winner for the most original book of the year by Libby Copeland. And this book was all about DNA testing and how it's shifting our understanding of who we are. And a quote from this book: "We look for ourselves in our family histories and in our genes, but such things alone do not make identity. We human beings are meaning makers, each of us a product of a particular time and place." And this book was just filled with so many stories of people chasing long lost biological parents after they were adopted, or finding out that maybe their person they thought was their father wasn't actually their father, and now they have a whole other group of relatives and a whole different identity for themselves. And it was just this really, really well put together book about something that is a new topic that is important for us to consider and becoming a bigger part of people's lives, which is finding out where they really come from and understanding that where they come from may not be exactly where they thought it was. So that was definitely a interesting and eye-opening read, worthwhile. The winner for the most original book was The Lost Family. The most shareable book of the year is Humankind, which is actually a translated book. So I believe it may have even come out last year, but the English translation came out this year. So it qualifies for the awards. And this book had a perspective that I think should give us all hope, which is catastrophes bring out the best in people. I know of no other sociological finding that's backed by so much solid evidence that's so blithely ignored. Most people deep down are pretty decent. And I think that that's part of the reason why this book has been such a phenomenon and such an amazing bestseller, because it has this perspective that I think we all need to hear and need to be reminded of, that the world isn't as bad as we often see it portrayed when we watch the media or when we hear about some of these things. And that is a beautiful thought and something that is truly underappreciated in many ways. So that is our final award winner for the year. I'm so excited to share all of those with you. I appreciate you all being part of this, of watching the show. Again, thank you to all of the authors who submitted all of their books. It was really hard to categorize, as you'll see in this cartoon, but we had such an absolute thrill reading all of these books, consuming them, and we are so excited to be able to present more books to you, because at the end of the day, I think the world that we all want, if you're watching this show, is to read more books, to have more books have more impact on more people. And if this helps to spotlight some of those books, like, that's really our goal. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here as part of our Non-Obvious Nation for another edition of the Non-Obvious Insights Show, and the last show of the year before we move into 2021. And we have an amazing 2021 planned on this show. We're going to be talking about CES going digital. We'll have lots more authors. We'll have more fascinating conversations. And I can't wait to share all of it with you in the new year. So happy early new year. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the group here. And remember, always stay non-obvious.